Heartbreak and anger from a family who lost their little girl too soon. A judge sentenced Alianna DeFreeze's killer to death today. Christopher Whitaker killed the 14-year-old last year, kidnapping her on her way to school.
A 14-year-old girl vanished on her way to school, and while her mother still believed she was somewhere safe, the man who would later be convicted of killing her was helping unload food at a church. Calm, present, useful, as if nothing had happened. That girl was Alianna DeFreeze. She had left home that morning for what should have been a normal school day in Cleveland, Ohio. A bus ride, a transfer, a classroom waiting, a mother expecting her child to return home later that afternoon. But Alianna never reached school, and no one at home knew. For hours. That is the part that makes this case almost unbearable. Not only what happened to Alianna, but how long the world kept moving as if nothing was wrong. The school day continued. The buses kept running. People passed through the same streets. And somewhere close to her route, an abandoned house was holding a secret no family should ever have to face. By the time Alianna's mother realized her daughter had never arrived at school, the most important hours were already gone. But this story does not begin with a body. It begins with a routine. It was not just one terrible act by one violent man. It was a chain of moments where something could have changed. A bus transfer where a child was suddenly alone. A man waiting in the area before she crossed his path. A witness who saw something troubling but did not call police because he was unsure what he was seeing. An abandoned house sitting close to her school route. A missed school alert. A delayed search. Each one may sound small on its own, but together they formed the gap Alianna fell into. And a question that still hurts years later. How many chances were there to save Alianna before everyone finally understood she was missing? In this episode, we are going to follow the morning Alianna disappeared, the delay that haunted her family, the evidence that led police to Christopher Whitaker, and the courtroom battle that exposed just how many failures surrounded one child's final school day. And as you listen, I want you to think about your own community. If a child fails to arrive at school where you live, how fast do parents get notified? And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Because in Alianna's case, one missing alert became one of the most important questions of all. If you're into real, in-depth true crime stories, make sure you subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories. Because this case is one you won't forget. Alianna Selena DeFreeze was only 14 years old. Not grown. Not independent. Not someone who should have been expected to face danger alone. She was a child. A 7th grade student at E-Prep and Village Prep Woodland Hills in Cleveland, Ohio. To the school, she was one of the children expected to arrive that morning. To her family, she was much more than that. She was a daughter, a granddaughter, a sister, and a young girl still growing into the person she was meant to become. Alianna lived between the people who loved her most. Her mother, Donisha Cooper, and her father, Damon DeFreeze, were part of a family that expected the same thing every parent expects on a school day. That their child would leave home, get to school safely, and come back when the day was over. That was the simple expectation. And that is what makes her story hurt even more. Because Alianna was not a child who should have been overlooked. She had a developmental disability, and those close to her understood that she needed care, patience, and protection. That detail matters. But the most painful part of Alianna's story is that danger did not appear at midnight, in a hidden place, or after days of warning. It appeared on a school morning, during a routine her family thought she could survive. January 26, 2017, began like a school day. No alarm in the house. No sign that this would become the morning Alianna DeFreeze's family would replay for the rest of their lives. Alianna was supposed to go to school. That was all. She was expected at E-Prep and Village Prep Woodland Hills. She was also expected for a 7 a.m. tutoring session. So the morning had a purpose. It was not a day she was meant to stay home. It was not a day anyone expected her to disappear from the path between home and class. Her mother, Donisha Cooper, walked her to the bus stop. That detail is important because it shows the care around Alianna. She was not simply sent out into the morning without thought. Her mother took her as far as she could. Alianna was wearing her school uniform, tan pants and a white shirt. The kind of ordinary detail that becomes painful later because it reminds everyone that she was dressed for school, not for danger. Before she left, Alianna gave her mother a kiss. A simple goodbye. The kind of goodbye parents receive every day without knowing they should hold on to it a little longer. From there, Alianna began the route her family knew. She was taking public transportation, using the RTA bus system to get to school. It was not a straight, simple trip. She had to take more than one bus. The first bus would carry her away from home, and then she would need to transfer near East 93rd Street and Kinsman Road before continuing towards school. That transfer point mattered. For many students, changing buses is just part of the morning routine. You step off one bus, wait, look for the next one, and continue the day. But for Alianna, who was only 14 and had a developmental disability, that short stretch between one part of the journey and the next carried more risk than anyone fully understood at the time. Some mornings, a friend would meet her and help make sure she got safely onto the second bus. But on this morning, that friend was late. So Alianna moved through that part of the route without the person who sometimes helped her make the connection. And from the outside, nothing about it may have looked unusual. A child in uniform. A bus stop. People heading to work. Vehicles passing. A city waking up. The kind of scene most people forget within minutes. But later, when investigators began trying to understand Alianna's final known movements, those ordinary details became the map. Camera recordings from the area helped show parts of her route. They showed that Alianna had boarded the first bus near home. They helped place her near the transfer area. They helped confirm that she got off near Bessemer Avenue and began walking north on East 93rd Street. At that point, she was still in motion, still trying to get to school, still close enough to the morning she was supposed to have. And that is what makes this section of the case so difficult to sit with. Alianna was not missing from a party. She was not out late. She was not doing something her family did not understand. She was following a school route. She was moving through a routine that had already been accepted as part of her life. But routines can hide danger when the wrong person is nearby. As Alianna walked, the morning around her did not stop. The city did not know that one child's day had already shifted from normal to dangerous. Her mother did not know. Her father did not know. Her school had not yet become the center of a missing child emergency. At that moment, Alianna was simply a girl who should have been arriving for tutoring. And every minute mattered. Because when a child is expected at school and does not arrive, time becomes more than time. It becomes the difference between searching early and searching late. It becomes the difference between knowing something is wrong and assuming everything is fine. That morning, the assumption was still that Alianna was on her way. But near East 93rd Street and Kinsman Road, the route that was supposed to carry her towards school instead placed her in the same area as Christopher Whitaker. He was not supposed to be part of her morning. He was not family. He was not a teacher. He was not someone sent to help her. Yet as Alianna moved through those streets, he was already in the area. And before the school day could even begin for her, Alianna's last normal moments were almost over. By the time Alianna stepped off that bus and moved through East 93rd Street, the morning had already placed her close to someone she should never have met. His name was Christopher L. Whitaker. He was 44 years old. And according to the case record, he had been in that area long before Alianna crossed his path. That detail matters. Because this was not a man who suddenly appeared for one passing second and vanished. Court records placed Whitaker around East 93rd Street and Fuller Avenue earlier that same morning at different points. He was seen there before school started, before Alianna's mother knew anything was wrong, before anyone understood that this ordinary school route had become dangerous. Alianna was still trying to get to school. Whitaker was already nearby. And in a case like this, that difference is terrifying. One person was a child following a morning routine. The other was an adult man moving around the same streets before she arrived. The video from the area did not show a long conversation. It did not show Alianna willingly spending time with someone she knew. What it showed was enough to haunt the case. Alianna encountered Whitaker. And at one point, she stepped away from him. That movement says a lot without a single word. A 14-year-old girl, alone on her way to school, sees or senses something that makes her create distance. She moves back. She does what many children are taught to do when someone makes them uncomfortable. But distance only protects a child when the adult backs off. Whitaker did not simply disappear from the scene. As the morning continued, two figures believed to be Alianna and Whitaker were later seen walking across a vacant lot toward Fuller Avenue. That direction would become important. Fuller Avenue was where the abandoned house stood. It was close enough to the route that a child could be taken there before anyone at school or home realized the danger had already happened. This is where the story changes from a missing school arrival to something much worse. Because Alianna was no longer just delayed. She was being pulled away from the path that was supposed to lead her to class. Think about how narrow that window was. A few minutes earlier, she was still connected to her normal life. The bus, the school route, the morning tutoring session, her mother's goodbye, her uniform, all of it still belonged to an ordinary day. Then she crossed into the reach of a man who had no place in her life. No family connection, no school connection, no reason to be near her. And yet, he became the person controlling where she went next. Later, investigators would look closely at the area, the movement, the timing, and the path toward Fuller Avenue. But in the moment, the morning did not announce itself as an emergency. The street did not freeze. The buses did not stop. People nearby did not immediately know a child had just been taken from the safety of her routine. But one person reportedly saw something. A witness at the bus stop later said he saw an unknown man grab Alianna and take her. That is one of the most painful parts of the entire case. Not because the witness understood everything and chose to ignore it, but because he did not know what he was looking at. He was unsure whether the man and the girl knew each other. He was unsure if they were related. So he did not call police. And that hesitation became the first major missed chance. Because from the outside, violence does not always arrive in a way people can instantly label. Sometimes it looks like an argument. Sometimes it looks like an adult pulling a child who might be his daughter, niece, or student. Sometimes a witness waits for certainty before acting. But when a child is being taken, certainty can come too late. Alianna was 14. She was alone. She had stepped away from Whitaker. Then she was seen being moved toward Fuller Avenue. And at that exact moment, one phone call might have changed the direction of the morning. The call was never made. The path toward Fuller Avenue led to a vacant house at 9412 Fuller Avenue. That address would become one of the most important places in the entire case. From the outside, it was another abandoned property in Cleveland. Another empty structure sitting in a neighborhood where children still had to walk, wait for buses, and pass through on their way to school. But on January 26, 2017, that house became the place where Alianna DeFreeze's school morning was violently taken away from her. She was supposed to be going to class. Instead, she was taken inside a house where no child should have been. And once she was inside, the case moved into a level of cruelty that is difficult to describe without losing sight of who Alianna was. She was not just a name in court records. She was 14. She was vulnerable. She was wearing a school uniform. Her family still believed she was somewhere along the route of an ordinary day. But inside that vacant house, the ordinary world had ended for her. What police later found there would show that this was not just a random hidden place. The house became a central part of the prosecution's case because of what was recovered inside and what those items suggested about Christopher Whitaker's actions. Among the items later recovered were a drill, a box cutter, a screwdriver, a hammer, and a nut driver. These were not details placed into the case for drama. They were evidence. They helped the prosecution argue that Whitaker's actions showed preparation and awareness, not confusion, not accident, and not a sudden moment he could not understand. That point became critical later, because Whitaker would try to place blame on drug use. He would suggest that he was high, that things became unclear, that his memory failed him. But prosecutors pushed back strongly against that version of events. To them, the evidence inside that house did not fit the story of a man who lost all control without knowing what he was doing. It fit a man who was present in the area, drew a child away from her route, brought her to a vacant house, and left behind a scene that showed intent. And that is why the abandoned house mattered so much. It was not just where Alianna was found. It was where the story of the crime itself became visible. The attack against Alianna was brutal. The medical examiner testified that Alianna suffered multiple injuries. Even more painful, many of those injuries were inflicted while she was still alive. That one fact alone changes the emotional weight of the case. It means this was not quick. It means Alianna endured pain, fear, and violence in a place where no one knew to look for her yet. While her mother had no warning, while school hours continued, while the city moved around that house without knowing what was inside. The cruelty of the crime was one part of the case, but the location added another layer of anger. A vacant house should not have been available as a place where a child could vanish from a school route. It should not have been standing open enough to become useful to someone like Whitaker. Yet there it was, close enough to the morning path that Alianna could be taken there before anyone at home even understood she had not made it to school. That is what makes Fuller Avenue so hard to separate from the rest of the story. Alianna was not taken to some faraway place. She was not hidden across the country. She was taken into a vacant house in the same city where people lived, worked, worshipped, and sent children to school. And after the attack, what Whitaker did next made the case even harder to understand. Later that same morning, he went to Golgotha Missionary Baptist Church and helped unload food pantry items from a truck. The assistant pastor testified that Whitaker did not appear unusual or intoxicated. That detail is deeply disturbing because of the contrast. Alianna's family still did not know where she was. Her school day had already become a nightmare. A vacant house on Fuller Avenue now held the truth. And Whitaker was able to appear in another setting, helping with church food, while giving no obvious sign of what had just happened. That is one reason the prosecution fought against the claim that this was only a drug-driven blackout. They pointed to his movements, his behavior, and the evidence connected to the house. They argued that what happened to Alianna showed knowledge and purpose. And when you follow the timeline, it becomes hard to ignore the order of events. A child leaves home for school. She reaches the transfer area. A man already seen in the neighborhood crosses her path. She is taken toward Fuller Avenue. A vacant house becomes the center of the crime. And hours pass before her family learns she never reached school. By then, the house had already become the place everyone would later search backward toward. But in that moment, nobody at home knew Fuller Avenue mattered. Donisha Cooper did not know her daughter had been pulled away from school. Damon DeFreeze did not know the morning routine had broken apart. The people who loved Alianna did not know that the most important place in the case was not far from the route she should have safely completed. That is the horror of this section of the story. For Alianna, the danger was already real. For everyone else, the alarm had not even started. While Donisha thought her daughter had made it to class, Alianna's seat was empty. The school knew she was absent, but the warning that should have reached home did not reach her mother. There was an automated messaging system meant to alert parents, but the alert did not get through. That failure would later become one of the most important parts of the civil case filed by Alianna's family. But in the moment, Donisha did not know any of that. She did not know that Alianna had never walked into school. She did not know that her daughter's morning route had been interrupted. She did not know that the most important hours were passing. And that is the cruelty of the delay. When a child is missing, time is not just a clock moving forward. Time is search area. Time is memory. Time is the chance that someone nearby may still remember what they saw. Time is the difference between asking the right question early and asking it after the trail has already grown colder. But no alarm reached Alianna's home early that morning. So the day continued. Classes went on. People moved through Cleveland. Buses kept running. And Donisha waited for the normal end of the school day, believing her daughter would return the way she always should have. Then Alianna did not come home. That was when worry became panic. A mother knows the difference between a small delay and something that feels wrong. Donisha expected her daughter back. When Alianna failed to return, she reached out to the school. And only then did she learn the truth that should have been told to her much earlier. Alianna had never arrived. Those words changed everything. Because now, the family was not dealing with a child who was late coming home. They were dealing with a child who had been missing since the morning. A child whose absence had been known at school, but not known at home. A child who had disappeared during the hours when everyone who loved her believed she was safe. Only after that discovery did the missing person search begin. By then, the delay had already done damage. The first hours after Alianna failed to reach school could not be recovered. The early chance to ask bus riders what they noticed was gone. The early chance to question people near the transfer area had narrowed. The early chance to connect her absence to the man seen near East 93rd Street and Fuller Avenue had been delayed. And for Alianna's family, that delay became more than a painful question. It became part of their legal fight. Later, Alianna's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit. One of the major claims was that the school's failure to notify them quickly about Alianna's absence cost critical time. They argued that if they had known earlier, the search could have started earlier. And in a case like this, the difference between morning and afternoon was not a small detail. It was everything. This is why Alianna's story is so difficult to hear. There was the man who took her. There was the vacant house. There was the witness who hesitated. And then there was the silence from the system that should have alerted her family. None of those moments can be separated from the pain of what happened. Each one sits beside the next, creating a chain that allowed a child's disappearance to go unnoticed for far too long. At this point in the story, who do you think had the first responsibility to act? The school, the witness, the city, or the people who knew that abandoned house was sitting there? Tell me in the comments, because this is the part of Alianna's case where one question becomes impossible to avoid. If her mother had been notified early that morning, how different could the search have been? The search began with panic, but it also began late. Family members were looking for her. School staff became involved. Police were brought into the search. Flyers were distributed. People were asked questions. The case spread beyond one frightened household and became a desperate attempt to find a child who had vanished during what should have been a normal school route. Later, federal help also became part of the effort, with the FBI joining as the search widened. But by then, Alianna had already been gone for hours. That is the pain that hangs over this part of the case. Her mother had to hold on to the possibility that Alianna might still be somewhere. Maybe lost. Maybe scared. Maybe unable to get home. Maybe found by someone who had not yet contacted police. Every parent in that position reaches for any possibility that does not end in tragedy. But 3 days later, on January 29, 2017, the search led police back to Fuller Avenue. The same area connected to the route Alianna had been taken toward. The same area where the vacant house stood. The house at 9412 Fuller Avenue was no longer just an abandoned structure. It became the place where the family's worst fear was confirmed. Officers entered the vacant house and found signs that led them deeper inside. Police followed blood evidence from the dining room area toward another room. Behind a closed door, they found Alianna. For her family, that moment turned uncertainty into devastation. Until then, there had still been a chance to imagine another ending. A chance that she might come home. A chance that someone might find her alive. A chance that the delay had not cost everything. But inside that house, the truth was waiting. Alianna had not run away. She had not skipped school. She had not simply taken the wrong bus. She had been taken. And what police found inside that house tied the discovery back to the violence that had happened there. The tools recovered from the scene became part of the case. The drill, the box cutter, the screwdriver, the hammer, and the nut driver. These items were not just objects in an empty house. They became evidence that helped explain why prosecutors later argued that Christopher Whitaker's actions were not the result of a confused blackout, but showed purpose and awareness. The scene also raised questions about Alianna's belongings. Her backpack and other personal items became part of the investigation, because in a case like this, every item matters. A school item can show where a child was headed. Clothing can show what happened inside a scene. DNA, blood evidence, and physical traces can connect a person to a place even when that person tries to deny involvement. That is where the search became a criminal case with a clear direction. Police were no longer only asking, "Where is Alianna?" They were now asking, "Who did this to her?" The vacant house answered part of that question. The evidence inside pointed toward what had happened. The condition of the scene showed the violence Alianna endured. And the physical evidence would later help connect Whitaker to the crime. But none of that could soften the moment of discovery. A mother who had sent her daughter to school now had to face the fact that Alianna had been found in a place she should never have entered. A father who expected his child to live a full life now had to hear that she had been discovered inside an abandoned house. A family that began the search with fear ended it with confirmation. And that confirmation carried a second layer of pain. Alianna had been close enough to be found within the city. Close enough that the same area she was taken toward became the area police eventually searched. Close enough that the question became even harder to bear. How could a child disappear on a school morning, be taken into a vacant house, and remain missing for 3 days before the truth was found? After Alianna DeFreeze was found inside the vacant house on Fuller Avenue, the search for a missing child became a search for proof. Police now had a crime scene. They had physical evidence. They had items recovered from inside the house. And they had one urgent question. Who had brought Alianna there? Christopher Whitaker did not begin by telling the truth. When police questioned him, he first denied knowing what had happened to Alianna. He tried to keep distance between himself and the crime. But the problem for Whitaker was that this case did not depend only on what he wanted to say. The evidence was already speaking. One of the strongest links came through DNA. A forensic analyst testified that semen recovered from Alianna matched Whitaker. That evidence placed him directly with her in a way he could not easily explain away. It was not rumor. It was not suspicion. It was science tying him to a 14-year-old girl who had disappeared on her way to school. And it did not stop there. Alianna's DNA was also found on several items recovered from the scene. Those items helped connect the house, the attack, and the person prosecutors said was responsible. In a case filled with painful questions, the DNA evidence began closing the space Whitaker was trying to leave between himself and Alianna. Then came the boot print evidence. Inside the house, there were bloody impressions. Investigators compared those impressions to Whitaker's boots, and the evidence connected his footwear to marks found in the house. That mattered because it placed more than his name near the case. It placed his movement inside the same environment where Alianna had been found. For Whitaker, the walls were closing in. He could deny. He could delay. He could change details. But each piece of evidence made the denial harder to believe. That is when his story began to shift. At first, he tried to claim he did not know Alianna and did not know what happened to her. But when police confronted him with evidence, his explanation changed. He began admitting involvement while trying to frame what happened around drug use. He claimed he had been high. He suggested that things became unclear. He tried to describe the morning as if it had fallen into confusion. But prosecutors would later argue that his words did not match the evidence. Because this was not simply a case of a man found near a scene. Whitaker had been seen in the area earlier that morning. Alianna had encountered him after getting off the bus. She had stepped away from him. Two figures believed to be Alianna and Whitaker were later seen moving toward Fuller Avenue. The vacant house contained tools connected to the attack. His DNA connected him to Alianna. Alianna's DNA appeared on items from the scene. And boot evidence placed him inside the house. The story he wanted to tell had to survive all of that. And there was another problem. The jail calls. After his arrest, prosecutors later used calls from jail as part of the case against him. They argued that those calls showed Whitaker trying to get others to support a false version of events, including claims connected to drug use and the possibility of other people being in the house. That was important because it suggested something beyond panic. If a man truly had no memory, if the entire event was only confusion, then why would there be an effort to shape a story afterward? Why would there be a need to push explanations through other people? Why would the version keep moving every time stronger evidence appeared? Those questions became dangerous for Whitaker, because the case against him was no longer only about what happened inside 9412 Fuller Avenue. It was also about what he did before, during, and after. His presence in the area before Alianna crossed his path. His encounter with her near her school route. The movement toward the vacant house. The evidence inside. His behavior after the attack. His changing statements. His calls from jail. Each piece stood on its own. But together, they formed a path leading back to him. For Alianna's family, this evidence could not bring her home. It could not undo the missed alert. It could not return the hours when her mother believed she was safe at school. But it did something the family desperately needed. It gave the case direction. It gave prosecutors a foundation. It gave the courtroom a way to separate excuse from proof. And for Whitaker, that became the central problem. He could say drugs affected him. He could say his memory failed. He could say the morning was unclear. But the evidence inside that house was not unclear. So the question became, when the case finally reached court, could Christopher Whitaker's claim of a drug blackout survive the DNA, the boot prints, the recovered items, the changed statements, and the jail calls?
It turned me into a monster, and I don't like who I became.
We are hearing for the first time from the man who was admitted to killing, raping, and murdering 14-year-old Alianna DeFreeze on her way to school in Cleveland last winter. A lot of people are asking, why the admission after his initial statement? Chris Ty here now to explain the strategy. Chris, good evening.
Russ, good evening to you. At first, he denied it, had an elaborate series of stories explaining that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then he admitted to being a monster, using screwdrivers and drills on his quiet teenage victim. Tonight, Christopher Whitaker in his own words.
The world is going to hate me now, and she never had a chance to grow up, never had a chance to experience anything, and I took that away from her, and there's nothing I can do to bring her back.
In the last few days, we've seen the final minutes of this 14-year-old's life on her way to school. Yesterday, they laid out the weapons, the drill, the knife, and the screwdriver through her head. This scene in this abandoned home was as grueling to work on as any, according to several grizzled Cleveland detectives, who today played the videotape.
Tell us what happened.
The tape that shows the transformation of a man denying he did it to a man ready to confess.
I was so high and I was so out of my mind, and it was like I was out of character, and I got what I got coming and I deserve it. I will write a formal apology to her family that they probably don't want to hear, but I will do it anyway. I don't want a circus made out of this. I just want to go to court and get it over with.
Now the strategy. He could be sentenced to death, laying his cards on the table, admitting it was him. That is all done to try and avoid being sent to death row down the road. For him, a major victory would be a life sentence without parole.
By the time the evidence began pointing toward Christopher Whitaker, the case was already horrifying. But then came another layer. Whitaker was not a man with no known history of violence. He was not someone who suddenly appeared in the case with no record behind him. Long before Alianna DeFreeze crossed his path on that school morning, his name had already been tied to crimes that should have made him a serious concern. His prior record included assault, criminal trespass, grand theft of a motor vehicle, burglary, theft, and aggravated theft. But the part that made Alianna's case even harder to accept was his past sexual and violent offense history. In 2005, Whitaker pleaded guilty to sexual battery and felonious assault. According to the background of the case, that earlier attack involved a woman he had allowed into his home to use the bathroom. He assaulted her and sexually attacked her. He was sentenced to prison and later classified as a sexually oriented offender. That fact changed the way many people looked at Alianna's death. Because Alianna did not cross paths with a man whose danger had never been documented. She crossed paths with someone who already had a known record involving violence and sexual offending. And she was only 14. She had a developmental disability. She was on her way to school. She was moving through a route her family believed she could take safely. But the man near that route had already shown, years before, that he was capable of harming someone in a deeply violent way. That is why this section of the story carries so much weight. It raises the kind of question families ask after tragedy, when the facts begin to come out and the pain turns into anger. How is someone with that kind of past able to be in the same space as a vulnerable child heading to school? It is not a simple question, and it does not erase Whitaker's personal responsibility. He alone chose what he did to Alianna. He alone became the man the evidence led back to. But his past made the case feel even more preventable to many people who followed it. Because the record was there. The earlier violence was there. The classification was there. And still, on the morning of January 26, 2017, Alianna ended up in the path of a man who had already been through the criminal justice system for serious offenses. For her family, this history could only deepen the wound. They were not just learning what happened to their daughter. They were learning that the person accused of taking her life had a past that already warned of danger. Alianna was a child trying to get to school. Whitaker was an adult with a documented record of violence and sexual offending. And once those two lives crossed on East 93rd Street, the case was no longer only about what happened inside the abandoned house. It became about why Alianna was ever left exposed to someone like him in the first place. When the case reached court, the facts that had been scattered across Alianna's final morning were finally placed in order. The criminal case was State v. Whitaker, docket number CR 17-614021. Christopher L. Whitaker stood accused of 10 felony counts connected to what happened to Alianna DeFreeze. The charges included aggravated murder, rape, kidnapping, aggravated burglary, tampering with evidence, and gross abuse of a corpse. By that point, the case was no longer only about finding Alianna. It was about proving what happened to her. It was about showing who took her from her school route. And it was about whether Whitaker's explanation could survive the evidence. In court, the defense did not build its case around the idea that Whitaker had nothing to do with Alianna. The evidence had already made that path almost impossible. His DNA connected him to her. Physical evidence connected him to the house. His own statements had changed after police confronted him with what they had found. So the defense focused on another issue, drug use and state of mind. Whitaker's attorneys argued that drugs affected him. They tried to present the crime through the lens of impairment, suggesting that his drug use had damaged his ability to control himself, understand his actions, or form the level of intent prosecutors needed to prove. But prosecutors pushed back hard. Their argument was clear. This was not the work of a man lost in confusion with no awareness of what he was doing. They pointed to the order of events. Whitaker had been in the area before Alianna crossed his path. Alianna was taken away from the route that should have led her to school. She was brought to a vacant house. Tools were recovered from that scene. Afterward, Whitaker appeared at a church and helped unload food pantry items, with testimony that he did not appear unusual or intoxicated. To prosecutors, those facts mattered, because they showed movement. They showed decisions. They showed a man able to function after the attack. And if he could function afterward, prosecutors wanted the jury to ask a difficult question. Was this truly a blackout, or was it an excuse built after the evidence began closing in? The courtroom heard about Alianna's route. It heard about the transfer area. It heard about the vacant house on Fuller Avenue. It heard about the physical evidence, the DNA, the bloody impressions, the recovered items, and the statements Whitaker made when investigators questioned him. But the courtroom also had to sit with who Alianna was. She was 14. She had a developmental disability. She was expected at school. She should have been safe on a morning route that other children used to begin their day. That contrast gave the trial its emotional weight. This was not only a legal argument about charges and evidence. This was a courtroom being forced to look directly at the gap between the life Alianna should have had and the violence that ended it. The jury eventually found Whitaker guilty. That verdict answered one part of the case. But because this was a capital case, the proceedings did not end with guilt. The next question was punishment. The jury had to consider whether Whitaker should be sentenced to death or receive a life sentence. During the penalty phase, the defense again tried to present mitigating evidence. They pointed to drug use and other factors they wanted the jury to weigh. Their goal was to convince jurors that, despite the horror of the crime, Whitaker's life should be spared. The prosecution argued the opposite. They asked the jury to weigh the aggravating circumstances against anything offered in mitigation. And the facts were severe. Alianna had been kidnapped. She had been raped. She had been murdered. She had been left inside a vacant house while her family searched for her. The jury recommended the death penalty. Then the court imposed it. Whitaker was sentenced to death. In addition to the death sentence, the court imposed an aggregate consecutive prison term of 48 years on the non-capital offenses. For Alianna's family, no sentence could restore what had been taken. No verdict could send her back to school. No courtroom ruling could give Donisha Cooper back the moment when she walked her daughter to the bus stop. No punishment could return the hours when her family believed she was safe, not knowing that the school day had already turned into a nightmare. But the trial did something important. It rejected the idea that Alianna's death could be explained away as a moment of drug-fueled confusion. It placed the evidence in front of a jury. It forced Whitaker's shifting stories to stand against DNA, physical evidence, witness testimony, and the sequence of his own actions. And in the end, the jury did not accept his excuse. They found him guilty. They recommended death. And the court sentenced him accordingly. For the first time since Alianna vanished, the legal system gave her family an answer. Not comfort, not healing, but an answer. Christopher Whitaker had been held responsible in court for the death of a child who should have made it to school. Even after the jury's verdict and the death sentence, Alianna DeFreeze's case did not end. It moved into another stage. Appeal. The case eventually reached the Supreme Court of Ohio as State v. Whitaker, 2022, Ohio, 2840. At that level, the court reviewed the convictions, the death sentence, and the legal issues raised from the trial. And one part of the judgment changed. The court vacated Whitaker's aggravated burglary conviction, along with the death penalty specifications that were tied specifically to aggravated burglary. The reason was legal, not factual. The vacant house on Fuller Avenue did not qualify as an occupied structure for the aggravated burglary charge. That point mattered in law, but it did not erase what happened to Alianna. The court did not set Whitaker free. It did not wipe away the core of the case. It did not say the evidence failed to connect him to Alianna's death. The remaining convictions were upheld. And so was the death sentence. For Alianna's family, that meant the highest court in Ohio had reviewed the case and still left the central punishment in place. The aggravated burglary portion changed, but the heart of the judgment remained. Christopher Whitaker was still legally responsible for kidnapping, raping, and murdering Alianna, and his death sentence still stood. But there was another fight outside the criminal case. Alianna's parents also filed a wrongful death lawsuit. That lawsuit named several defendants, including E-Prep and Village Prep Woodland Hills, the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, the City of Cleveland, Christopher Whitaker, Friends of Breakthrough Schools, and the owner of the Fuller Avenue house. This civil case was not about whether Whitaker committed the crime. The criminal trial had already answered that. The lawsuit focused on something wider: the failures Alianna's family believed surrounded her disappearance. One of the biggest issues was the school notification. Alianna had not arrived at school that morning. Her family argued that they should have been told quickly. Instead, her mother did not learn early that Alianna was absent. According to the family's claim, that delay cost time that could have been used to search for her sooner. And in Alianna's case, time was everything. The family's argument was painful but direct. If the school had notified them when Alianna failed to arrive, the alarm could have been raised earlier. Police could have been contacted earlier. People along the bus route could have been questioned earlier. The area near East 93rd Street, Kinsman Road, and Fuller Avenue could have been searched earlier. No lawsuit could prove with certainty that an earlier search would have saved Alianna. But the family believed the delay reduced her chance of being found in time. The lawsuit also raised concerns connected to the abandoned house where Alianna was found. That property did not just become part of the criminal case. It became part of the larger question of how unsafe places can sit in communities where children are walking to school. In 2022, Alianna's family received a reported $1 million settlement connected to the civil lawsuit. But money could never be the real ending to this story. It could not bring Alianna back. It could not return the lost hours. It could not change the morning her mother walked her to the bus stop. What it did show was that Alianna's case had moved beyond one courtroom verdict. Her death forced questions about school responsibility, parent notification, abandoned properties, and how quickly a missing child's absence should become an emergency. Because Alianna did not vanish in the middle of the night. She vanished on her way to school. And that fact made the legal fight bigger than one man's punishment.
Children, there's a lot of Christopher Whitakers out here. There's a lot of Christopher Whitakers out here. They're watching as I speak.
What do you think of the death penalty recommendation?
I wanted life without the possibility of parole, but I respect whatever the jury and the judge has come up with. I prefer him to sit there forever. You can sit on death row forever, but you're isolated. I want this man to experience hell on earth before he experiences hell in the afterlife.
Alianna DeFreeze's name did not disappear with the closing of the courtroom. It became attached to a law built from one of the most painful failures in her case. The hours her family did not know she had never reached school. After Alianna's death, Ohio passed what became known as Alianna's Alert. Under that law, schools are required to make at least one attempt to contact a parent, guardian, or caregiver within 120 minutes after the beginning of the school day when a student is absent without legitimate excuse and the family has not already notified the school. That law exists because of Alianna, because a child left home for school, because she did not arrive, because her mother was not told early enough, because the search began after precious hours had already passed. And when a child is missing, hours are not small things. They are roads not searched. They are witnesses not questioned early. They are doors not checked soon enough. They are moments that can never be returned. Alianna's alert could not bring her back. No law could do that, but it forced schools to treat an unexplained absence as something more serious than a mark on an attendance sheet. It turned a child's missed arrival into a reason to act fast. And that is where Alianna's story must end. Not with Christopher Whitaker, and not only with the vacant house on Fuller Avenue. It must end with Alianna herself. A 14-year-old girl. A 7th grader. A daughter of Donisha Cooper and Damon DeFreeze. A child with a developmental disability who needed the world around her to pay attention a little faster, care a little harder, and respond before the danger became irreversible. She should have made it to school that morning. She should have sat through tutoring. She should have walked into her classroom. She should have returned home and told her mother about her day. She should have grown older. She should have had a future that was not reduced to court records, news reports, and a law named after her. But Alianna never came home. And that is the part that stays. Because this case was never only about one man's cruelty. It was also about the silence that followed her absence. The missed alert, the delayed alarm, the abandoned house, the hesitation of a witness who did not know what he was seeing until it was too late. So when we say her name, we are not just remembering how she died. We are remembering who should have been protected. Alianna DeFreeze, a child who left for school and should have come back. If this story moved you, comment Alianna's name below so her life is remembered beyond what was done to her. Share this story for awareness, especially with parents, teachers, and anyone responsible for children's safety. And subscribe to Dark Trace Crime Stories, where every crime leaves a shadow.